And he's the Chief Operating Officer of the Institute for Economic Affairs. Putting it, you and I are coming from a very similar place economically and politically. I'm fully aware of that and put my cards on the table. But we are now reaping what Thatcher sowed, and it is looking damned painful to many.
Well, I don't think that's quite right, Alistair. The main thing that's happened in the last 20 years is growing intervention and interference in what was a reasonably successful privatisation. So what we've seen is the growth of increasing numbers of energy policy interventions by the government, whether it's on the provision of different types of energy for low carbon purposes, or green home schemes, or other interventions deeper in the supply chain that people often don't notice, such that what we have now is a partially privatised market. But in reality, the government is now even setting energy prices. So the price mechanism is not working in a large number of different areas of energy markets. And this is the mess that the government has created for itself.
The two main interventions that people on my Twitter feed, and as we all know, Twitter is not the world, but they're a bright bunch. The two main government interventions that they are mentioning are the level of VAT that's levied on fuel and being chicken on fracking and nuclear.
Well, all three of those are relevant. So if we take those in turn, VAT, there are two different positions on this, really. One is very simple, get rid of it. Now we've left the EU, we don't have to abide by minimum VAT levels, so we could simply reduce the rate to zero, be done with it, and have cheaper energy as a result. The other side of that coin is
that would be the second biggest possible hit on the public finances. If you abolish VAT, biggest
there's always
hit.
going to be hits on the public finances. I mean, the welfare costs of increasing energy prices alone will eat up any benefits. I believe Adam mentioned £1 billion would be raised. Yeah. Well, that's wiped out straight away with increasing welfare bills. And welfare is the correct way of addressing high energy prices, not tinkering with the price itself, because that simply distorts the market.
Let me take you one step back, as I did with Adam as well, and just to be clear, because I think on this one we will agree, you can't buck markets in terms of the supplies, whether it's gas coming from Putin or whether it's still diminishing volumes of oil coming from the Middle East or whatever. That you're stuck with.
Correct to a point, but what the government has done is destroyed incentives for new investment in supply. So the point about fracking is this is a government-imposed policy. The government has decided what the regime for fracking should be and is effectively a regulatory ban by putting safety and environmental measures on the industry so extreme that if a ladder fell over next to a fracking site, it would stop production for that day for fear of there being an earthquake. That's nothing to do with markets, that's government policy. On nuclear, little bit different. The government could have increased supply of nuclear faster, but the trouble there is the nuclear industry has yet to come up with safe, affordable forms of nuclear power that can be deployed at speed. It's still a very slow and clunky industry. So it's always the chimera solution to many of our problems. France managed somehow to get it right many decades ago, but they're now paying the price for old, retiring nuclear power stations that are being taken offline as we speak. So it's not a panacea. The only solution we have in the interim before we look at this bright low-carbon nirvana in the future, and we don't yet know how far in the future, is gas. And gas is the most flexible form of supply. It's the one that can be used for baseload. It's the one that can be used for dispatchable power. And it's the one which we have domestic supplies that the government is deliberately blocking for a matter of policy, not just fracking, but also in the North Sea. They're looking at new bids from companies like Shell and throwing up ridiculous net zero interventions and objections by the civil service to stop them investing in new fields. Yeah. And private investors just aren't going to do that.
Yeah. I find it intriguing that there you are, coming from where you are politically and economically, talking about overburdensome regulation on fracking, the introduction of a VAT rate, which could have been got rid of because of Brexit, and really not loosening up the market properly. And finally, it is also the same people who gave the green light to these smaller supply companies, all of whom have gone bust for various reasons. All of that under the government of the sons and heirs and daughters and heirs of Margaret Thatcher. This was a Conservative government these last 20 years that made all of these profound errors.
Well, the Conservative Party, I think, for 20 years was looking for a new ideology to replace Thatcherism, which it regarded as being somewhat tarnished and tainted during the New Labour period in office. And they were looking for a kinder, gentler conservatism. And in the process, they found green ideologies instead, of which net zero is the latest incarnation. And that requires you to take a very hardline position on making energy more expensive, because the only way you accelerate net zero beyond the speed that the market is prepared to deliver it is by forcing up prices. So we are now 2 to 3 months into an entirely predictable energy prices crisis, where the only reasonable insight is that the government wants this to happen. They do not care. They want energy prices to rise. They want people to pay more, and they want those higher prices to deliver low carbon energy solutions, including energy efficiency in homes, which, if prices remain this high, people will be incentivized to invest in. So this is not an accident. This is a matter of deliberate government policy. And if they really cared about it, they would be doing a lot more than they're doing at the moment, which is just sitting there, frankly.
And letting people come April, May 2022 literally go cold or live in the dark.
Yep. That is policy.
I'm jaw-dropped. I'm absolutely jaw-dropped. Adam Scorer said he reckons it's between 300 million and a little more to bail out the poorest. Are you seriously saying that, in your view, this government will say, that's the new Tory tomorrow, get real, dim the lights a little, get another blanket?
No, they won't do that to the poorest. What they'll do is find a welfare solution to that, whether it's through an energy incentive scheme or through universal credit itself. What they won't do is bail out the rest of us. Because if you start interfering with prices again and artificially suppressing them, you're going to have to pay for that through the tax system.
Yeah.
So that will transfer the cost across everybody.
Sure.
But that's hidden.
Yeah.
So what they're going to do instead is increase benefits, say they're doing something, but for everybody else, and that means people who are not necessarily poor but are fairly close to being poor, are going to pay much, much more, up to £300, £400, £500 on their energy bills.
Yeah. The final point, and we've talked about such matters many times in the past, Andy, but I want to put to you this point. When my producer, Steve, and I were talking about what we wanted to do as our main talking point tonight, and I proposed this, we were chatting around it, and I said, look, make no mistake, in my view, economically and politically, this runs the risk of being the major crisis, politically and economically, in 2022. Am I pushing it, or am I right?
No, you could well be right. I mean, we can't say what other crises will come along. I mean, the deteriorating situation with Russia and Ukraine, for example, may create a wag the dog moment that distracts the government from the underlying issues of energy policy. But it's looking like a very strong contender as being an absolutely outrageous rise in the cost of living that was utterly avoidable if the government had actually done more to ensure there would be more domestic supply and they had a backup plan, other than simply trying to tinker with the cap to pretend that they're keeping prices down when in fact they're transferring the cost onto the general taxpayer.